Okay, so welcome. My name is Greg Newton. We are here with Hari Ziyad for a reading from their book, Black Boy Out of Time. And I'm super excited that they've taken time out of their busy schedule to join us. I know they've been doing lots of events. But right before we get started, I just wanted to say a couple of words about the Bureau. We are a queer bookstore and event space that my partner Donnie Jochum and I founded in New York City in 2012 with the help of many volunteers and friends. And we've managed to keep it going ever since. In 2014, we moved to the LGBT Community Center on West 13th Street. And we are still there. The center has been closed due to the pandemic, and they won't be reopening until July at the earliest. So here we are. Our events are online. We're going to keep doing this. And we also have launched an online store. So I'm going to briefly share that with you so you can see what that looks like. So here is our store at bgsqd.com. And if you scroll down, you'll see a couple of things. You can see books by category. We have a section called Reclaim Pride Coalition Recommends. The Reclaim Pride Coalition is an organization that sponsors the Queer Liberation March. They've done that for the past 2 years, and they're going to do it again this year. So we're also partnering with them on bringing you some panels. The first one is going to start next week. That's one that's going to be on houselessness. So check out our events page to see that. And you can click on this page on the store to see which books they recommend. And then if you scroll down to featured products, you'll see books that are for upcoming events. And we usually put those on sale for 25% off. So Hari's book, Black Boy Out of Time, is there. It will remain at 25% off till the end of the day. So if you would like to purchase that from us, we would be very grateful. That helps us to keep doing what we're doing. And thank you to everyone who made donations when you signed up on Eventbrite. We really appreciate that. That helps us to keep doing all of this. And someday we will be back in the flesh, in the store, hosting live events. And I can't wait for that to happen. I got my first immunization shot today. We're on the route. And I'm hoping that the center might open sooner than they anticipate, but we'll see what happens. So I'm going to introduce Hari, read their bio, and they're going to read a section from the book. And as I mentioned in the chat, if you have questions for Hari, you can type those in the chat function, and we'll go through those towards the end in the last 15, 20 minutes. All right, so let me pull up your bio. So Hari Ziyad is a cultural critic, a screenwriter, and the editor-in-chief of Race Baiter. They are a 2021 Lambda Literary Fellow, and their writing has been featured in BuzzFeed, Out, The Guardian, Paste Magazine, and the academic journal Critical Ethnic Studies, among other publications. For more information about the author, visit hariziyad.com. So please put your hands together and welcome Hari, and let's get started.
Thank you so much, Greg. I'm honored to be here and to be sharing the space with all of you all. I'm going to start with a quick reading from the book. Book is about a lot of things, but one of the main things is it's an exploration of reclaiming our childhoods as Black people and queer people in particular. And this chapter is one that's written to my younger self about the ways that my current partner has taught me or reimagined language around love in ways that I imagined when I was younger. So I thought that was very appropriate for today, and I hope you all enjoy. It's called A Prayer for New Language. Hari Gora, I am engaged now. Can you believe it? I'm engaged to a boy, the type of boy of your dreams, a Black boy with teeth that dig a cavern into his tongue, through which the cutest lisp spills out like a freshwater stream, a boy with teeth that are crooked, with teeth that are perfect, with teeth through which he whispers for me to grease his scalp on lazy Sunday afternoons, or tries to whisper. He can't quite do it. It seems to be physiologically impossible for him. But I read somewhere that whispering requires the abduction of vocal cords. I know abduction can mean the way muscles pull away from each other, but I also know it can mean his voice is too vast to be kidnapped. I'm so sorry I'm too loud, he says repentantly after laughing so boomingly that I'm commanded to listen to him instead of the television show we are laying down to watch, now that the roots of his locks have been properly moisturized. He must have noticed that I'm tired and my head hurts. I just want to watch my show, and the cannonade annoys me. And though we are getting married soon, I'm still afraid of these moments. I'm still afraid of how I don't always know how to listen, even to those I love the most, even when commanded to, even when I know that I should. I've been so preoccupied with talking at you and trying to raise you from the dead that I haven't fully grasped the beauty you offer in teaching me about how to listen. Something about how to let folks rest in peace, especially when their peace is different from mine, louder than mine. Society places familiarity at the root of care so much that I always see danger in anything with which I have less than a significant degree of similarity, so much so that I feel compelled to run from anything that doesn't rest inside my comfort zone or to prove that it does despite reality. But perhaps learning to listen to Black children, both gone and still here, is a necessary model for how to be present for others, even when our experiences diverge, even amid the differences of our wants, needs, and desires, even when forced to stay physically apart, even when I don't fully know the other person's language. And isn't that all love really is? When Timothy proposed after the opening night of his one man show last year, I told him yes, but I don't think will you marry me was really the question. He doesn't even believe in state sanctioned marriage. Neither of us believes that the state should have the power to legitimize our relationship. And we don't believe that the benefits marriage affords to people should be refused to those who can't or don't tie the knot. We don't believe in how the fight for same sex marriage took up so much of last decade's queer agenda when so many Black queer kids like you were living and dying on the streets, when so many Black transgender and intersex kids were fighting and dying in opposition to the idea that there is a such thing as same sex. And neither of us believes in recreating a heteronormative family image in gay drag. Fuck marriage, I told Tim when we discussed the possibility months before his proposal. But I do want a ceremony to celebrate our love, and I want to be in the best legal position to adopt our children, I conceded. I explained my thought process to my best friend Lisa when we met up for the first time after my engagement, before asking her to be my maid of honor. Of course, she replied in a squeak that can be produced only when you are as small as she is, and the excitement for the good fortune of someone you care about tries and fails to abduct your vocal cords. Lisa is 4 feet 10 with the thickest socks on her feet, but she always reminds me that Black Virginian women have never let their size be the reason they disappear. Or will it be best woman? She ponders aloud, her Southern twang blanketing the words in a warmth only Black Southern twangs can create. I told her yes, which wasn't an answer, but I don't think is it maid of honor or best woman was really the question. Fuck marriage and how gendered it is, she conceded, but so often we both admit it. This limited gendered language offers the only words we can think of to describe our relationships with other people. Lisa and I were suddenly 5 drinks in, and our excitement had been sufficiently libated into a clumsy release of our demons, the liquor beaming a spotlight onto the darkest monsters in the gaps between us. Maybe you won't get it because you're not a woman and the pressure to be with someone is different for you, Lisa said. But I get so lonely when my friends find serious partners. I ordered both of us another round. But it's not just because I'm reminded that I'm single, she continued. I'm trying not to give too much energy to those pressures. But when my friends get serious partners, they forget about me. I just hate always coming second to everyone. You don't come second to me. You're my best friend, I assured her. But that's not the same, she told me, and I knew she was right. Are you really ever going to choose me over Timothy? We'd had this conversation before. We keep having it because we keep asking things that aren't really the questions, that aren't really what we need to ask, but seem to be all we have words for. And I'm not asking you to choose me, she said. I would never ask that. That's why I know how this is going to go, because that's how it has already gone. As a single woman, this is the labor I expect to do. She pointed out all the time I spend at home in Brooklyn now, how since I moved in with Timothy, I rarely come to Harlem, where she and most of the rest of our friends live. When you're in a relationship, that person comes first, she said. Her little hand is no bigger than yours ever became before you left this body to me, Harigora, but somehow it made its way fully around the giant glass of $6 House Merlot. I apologized. She told me I didn't have to. I told her I will do a better job of being there when she needs me in the future, of listening when I know I should, that though I know that lovers and friends aren't the same, I didn't believe that always prioritizing the former at the expense of the latter was the way things have to be, that her feeling sad about these priorities and me doing nothing to address her concerns shouldn't be the inevitable conclusion just because she's a woman. I tried to explain that love needn't be a competition and we should be able to show up in different ways for different people without comparison. That it feels like we can't only because capitalism turns everything into a limited commodity, leaving us with a shortage of connection. Then I reiterated that she is my best friend, as if that wasn't just its own type of prioritizing, as if I didn't know this wasn't really the answer either, as if I knew what was. Harigora, you spoke a love language that still feels foreign to me. People may laugh when I talk of your imaginary friends today, but there was something critical I can't quite master about how you allowed Kula's, Saya's, and India's love to be enough, even when they weren't here in the same way as you. It ensured that there never was a competition to put a favorite above the rest. It established freedom from the expectation for them to do more emotional labor simply because they were girls, and freedom to not even expect them to always be girls, as imaginary friends don't require a static gender the way this society demands of us. I know that your love for these friends was liberating, primarily because they weren't limited by this anti-Black realm. But what does that mean for me if I can't seem to obscure and escape from it? If anyone can help me along my journey to mastering the tongue you spoke of love with, it's Timothy and his cute ass lisp. We met at a Black queer picnic hosted by a mutual friend. We were both dating other people at the time, me casually, him not so much. We'd been friends on social media for a while. We're both writers, and I could tell through his work that he loved Black folks, so I fucked with him. He was at a picnic with his boyfriend. I was there with my friends and roommates, Ahmad and Charles. I never met Timothy in person and was struck when I saw him in real life. I mean, I literally felt as if I'd been hit by something, more a comet than lightning, more I thought I knew what love was, but what I knew was inadequate to describe this feeling than love at first sight. I legit told Charles to keep me away from Timothy because he was just too damn fine, and I didn't want to start any trouble. Charles said I was sprung, and to this day jokingly throws my behavior at the picnic in my face whenever my fiance comes up in conversation. You still sprung, Charles laughs, and I laugh too. Can't deny the facts. And that's the beginning of chapter 12. Thank you all.
Thank you, Hari. That's so lovely. It's such a tender book. And I think it's such an interesting structure, the way you talk about your experiences and weave them into the larger world, the larger context in such a seamless way. Um, and I love that you're alternating those chapters with letters to your younger self. Um, and I'm wondering, how did you decide on that structure?
Yeah, like I said, the book is about reclaiming childhood, and so in a way that kind of was, it was going to end up there anyway. But it really came to me when I was in therapy while I'm writing this book, which I hope everybody who writes memoirs at least exploring, because a lot of things will get brought up. But in therapy, as we were talking about, in particular, a lot of like the childhood traumas, my therapist suggested inner child work, which is a process of communicating with the parts of yourself that might still be operating from the space of childhood, that
Mm.
might need to a certain type of like parenting energy that you can hopefully cultivate through this process of speaking to your younger self in that way. And so I was doing that in therapy, and therapy was becoming such a big part of the book in so many other ways. And I was like, oh, why can't I just include this inner child work? in the book. And so I view those chapters as just an extension of that work that I was doing in therapy that was helping me along the process of reconnecting with those parts of me that the book explores.
Great. Yeah, I think it's very effective, and I think it's something that many queer people could benefit from. I'm speaking for myself as well, just because of the distance that we have from our childhood, and the complicated relationships we have with our childhood. There's a term that you use. There are a couple terms that you use that are really interesting, and that help to articulate things that maybe aren't always articulated. One of them is carceral dissonance.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about that and how that uh, relates to your childhood self, how that kind of seems to kind of cleave your childhood from adulthood.
Yeah, so while we were doing this inner child work, initially I struggled a lot because a lot of the resources that we were using to talk about this work that my therapist had like shared with me were one written by white people and didn't really acknowledge the systematic forces that might come into play when we're talking about this disconnect from childhood is very individualistic and about like interpersonal relationships, and all of those things are important, but in particular in the lives of like Black children, there's also this whole state apparatus that works um, to create some of the traumas that might allow you to feel this disconnect that you hope to bridge in a process like inner child work. And so I wanted to, in the book, offer space for exploring that, and acknowledging that even within some of the things that we work through that might be within like our relationships with our parents or other experiences that we might have, tying those to the systemic anti-Blackness that we experience as well. So I think there's a particular way that Black people are disconnected from their inner child, and carceral dissonance is the term that I use to name that.
Yeah. And the other term you use is misafropedia.
Yeah,
Um, is, how would you distinguish that?
Miss Afro. So carceral distance is specifically about the disconnect. Misafropedia is a term that I use. It's rooted in the term misopedia, which is a hatred or disdain of children.
Mhm.
But there's a specific way that I think Black children experience anti-Blackness, and that's not talked about. I mean, it's talked about. I mean, we talk about the school to prison pipeline. We talk about adultification, but there wasn't an easy to use term that I could use to like be an umbrella for all of these experiences. And those experiences contribute to carceral dissonance for sure.
Right.
But the misafropedia are the experiences themselves, whereas carceral dissonance would be um, the results of those experiences. And so I was inspired by Moya Bailey, who coined the term misogynoir.
Right.
And that was something that she came up with because there was a dearth of language about the intersection of how sexism and anti-Blackness affect Black women, and that it created a lot more opportunity for folks to have conversations around that. And so I was hoping to open up that same space to talk about Black childhoods, which is the center of a lot of my work. And because I think that unpacking misafropedia or the specific oppressions that Black children face is very central to all of this healing work and abolition work that the book explores.
And you do a lot of that work in your writing. Aside from the memoir, you've written in a number of places, and you also have the site Race Baiter. I'm wondering if you want to say a few words about you. You launched it, right? It's your baby.
Yes, it's my baby. I launched it in 2015 because I was writing. I started like freelancing not too long before, and I realized that just how difficult it was to have conversations about stuff like this in mainstream publications, even the ones that are ostensibly for Black people. Conversations about abolition have become a little bit more, we've talked about like defund the police and things like that now, but back then in particular, it was very hard to have those
Yeah.
conversations in a public space. And so I wanted to curate that space for myself. Initially, it was just a place where I was putting my own writings. And I named it Race Baiter because I knew that when you start to have these conversations, you're going to get that charge, right? Like people are going to say you're using the race card or you're race baiting.
Yeah.
And was thinking very much about like Toni Morrison and what it meant to not always be responsive to that energy,
Yeah.
and what kinds of space you can cultivate by just completely preempting that. And so I chose the name, and it has had a really interesting effect of like when a lot of white supremacists or like racists come across it, they don't know, they think it's a joke or something, and they don't really know how to engage. Which I think it speaks a lot about like how we think about visibility and like think about gazes. I wasn't even expecting that part of the name to have that effect on um, the way that the work was engaged, but I think that that is very central to what it became. So after I was posting my own works, people started reaching out to me. I was like, oh, like this space, like I love what you're doing here. Can I publish something? And eventually it grew to what it is now. Like I've been able, with the support of readers and supporters, it's fully reader funded, to hire a very small part-time team. And now we only publish outside works, usually up and coming writers, people who don't have a lot of other publication credits elsewhere, about issues of race, gender, and sexuality with an abolitionist perspective. Um, and yeah, like you said, it's my baby. I'm really proud of the work that we've done there.
Yeah, it's great. From what I've seen, I've checked it out, and I highly recommend that to people. Someone asked earlier about spelling of Miss Afropedia, and I hope I spelled it right. I
Yes.
don't know. You see it in the chat? Okay, cool. Excellent. And then speaking of, I know you're a Lambda Literary Fellow this year. Maybe you could say a little bit about what that entails, what kind of support that involves, or
Yeah,
what does that mean for those who aren't
yeah, I mean,
familiar with
Lambda
it?
is this great organization for like queer folks across many different mediums. I haven't done the fellowship yet, and so I'm still. It was supposed to be last year, but because of COVID, we're pushing it to the end of the year. So there's still a lot of that I'm going to learn about the organization, how it works, and what kinds of supports that they're going to offer. But I mean, I know people who've done this, and it's been a really great launching pad for queer writers, and queer writers of color in particular, um, to meet with different mentors. Like we'll be having like a mentorship aspect of the fellowship, and like workshopping pieces, and also like just connecting with other people and within your cohort. So I'm really looking forward to that at the end of the summer.
And that's an actual, like, you spend a week together, right?
Yes.
In LA, I think is where they're based.
Well, this year, even though we're doing it still, it's still going to be virtual as of now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, generally it's in person, which
Yeah.
is sad, but I think the way that they've um, figured it out, it'll still be really beneficial, and I think it'll be a great experience.
Yeah, I would think so too. Lambda does a lot of great work. I think that's probably how I learned about your book. Lambda is where I learn about pretty much so many of the books that we end up making available in our store. So it's a great organization, and we've worked with them in the past. We're really happy that they do the work they do, especially that kind of intergenerational work of mentoring.
Mhm.
Um, and speaking of that, I'm wondering if there's some writers who've been important to you in your development. I mean, you have some great commendation quotes from some really great writers. Darnell Moore, I know, is one. Stephen Thrasher. Um,
Yeah.
if you want to say anything about those relationships and about the importance of them.
Yeah, I mean, those relationships have been so crucial. Almost all of like the opportunities that I've gotten, like someone will share because it come across um, their networks, and folks who have been really, really consistent have been like Darnell,
Mhm.
has been really great with that. Um, and Stephen in particular was someone like when I was doing more journalism work and reporting, I remember I called him because I was reporting on a case and he had done the whole Michael Johnson reporting, and I remember speaking to him and he was I want to support you throughout this story, but like we're gonna become friends. And he kind of claimed this mentorship role in a really beautiful way, and has taught me so much about reporting and journalism. Really excited for his book to be coming out, I think this upcoming year. Uh,
Yeah,
Kiese Layman has been a really important figure in my writing life as well. I am also really great friends, but also someone who I look up to is Philip Williams, who's a queer poet. Who and I love the fact with working with Philip is like we work in different um, mediums. Like he's a
yeah,
poet, but there's so much I learn about language through engaging with his work, and I read so much more poetry because of it. And so mentors have been really critical throughout the entire process of writing this book, through setting up Race Bader. All of these people have supported Race Bader at one time or another. And so they've taught me a lot about the importance of doing that for anyone who I can do that to who's coming up. So
right,
I try to keep that in mind when someone asks me for a blurb or something, like how keep that
right.
energy of Darnell and Kiese and Stephen.
That
Uh,
generosity.
yeah.
Excellent. That's great. Um, Something we didn't haven't talked about much yet is your family and your father was Muslim or is Muslim, and your mother is Hari Krishna.
Yes.
Um, what I mean, for those of I mean, just to give people a teaser of what that looked like growing up, because it's such an unusual uh, childhood to have, I think, for many Americans at least.
Yeah. So my mother converted to the Hare Krishna religion, as it's known. Its real name is Vaishnavism. It's a branch of Hinduism.
Right.
Um, that was very popular in the 70s when she converted, amongst mostly like hippie communities, and not black people like she was. And so she converted with my grandmother at the same time, and they were like one of the first black people in this community. And by the time I was born, she converted about 30 or 20 years before I was born. There was a little bit more space for Black people in the community, but still, it's mostly here in America, a lot of white converts, and largely Indian outside of this country. So it was really interesting growing up, and I mostly grew up within the Hare Krishna community, going to the temple, and doing. My mother is kind of like a minister figure.
Yeah.
In the Hare Krishna community, we didn't have a temple in Cleveland, so we would do classes at home, Bhagavad Gita classes.
Right.
And my father and her did a lot of like multi-faith work together. He was Muslim, also converted through like the Nation of Islam. But like I said, I mostly grew up Hare Krishna. I would go to mosque with him sometimes.
Right.
And it taught me a lot about the ways, just seeing like these two Black women carve out this space for themselves and their family against all of the pressures that they must have been facing,
Yeah.
and against all of these pressures to like conform, because this is like very non-conformist. Taught me a lot, and I didn't think that I ultimately realized it as much as I do now about what that could mean for like my queerness. But especially as I was like reconciling with my relationship with my mother before she passed, seeing how she did that was really, really important. I don't practice now, but that foundation is still a big part of my life.
Well, my condolences. I didn't know that your mother had passed. I know that she was suffering from cancer. That's something you talked about in the book. So my condolences for that. And you do talk about showing the book or sharing the book with your parents and with your family before you put it out into the world. I wonder if you want to say a few words about how that went. What was that experience like? Maybe what you expected versus what you got.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting experience because as if you read the book, you'll see it's really dives deep into those relationships, and especially with my mother. We didn't have there was a lot of tension when I told her that I was queer.
Yeah.
That um, there was a lot that needed to be resolved, just in particular. And while she's sick, like that made it a lot more difficult to do that, but also made it a lot more urgent to do that work. And so one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did is share all of this, like not just write a story about her and like put it in the book, but
Yeah.
make it be the foundation for the conversations that we needed to have regardless. And so I would share any early drafts of chapters that featured her. And my mother actually responded very like, "This is your story." Like, I don't remember. She would be honest, like, "I don't remember things like this if that was the case." But
Hmm.
she gave me a lot of leeway to just tell that story, and it led to a lot of really wonderful conversations around the ways that things happen. And my father, though, was a little bit more resistant, even though he's not as heavily featured in the book. There were a lot more interesting conversations because he was like, "No, things didn't happen this way." And then so the chapters became about, and the book itself, I think, became about much more about why we remember the things that we remember, and the ways that we remember them versus like these set of memories and how that shaped my life. I think um, memory is a really interesting place to figure out, like, because there's so much about like our own politics and our own perspectives and our own biases that shape the way that memories come out. And having those conversations with my parents really highlighted that. In a way that I think was really beneficial to the book, even despite those conversations with my father.
Yeah.
Well, the
Yeah.
chapter with my father, like eventually I had to write, like he says he doesn't remember it like this. And I think
That
that
was kind of you.
but and then the rest of the chapter is about like why we remember things like that and why was that such a touchy point for him, because for me what he was saying he didn't remember wasn't that big of a issue. And so it was a lot more fun to dig into why we were having those conversations.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I'm wondering if anyone in our audience, sorry, I'm having headphone trouble. Um, I'm wondering if anyone in the audience would like to ask any questions, either type them in or just, uh, or ask them yourself. But while we're waiting for that,
Yeah, I have a
oh,
question.
oh, we have a question. Great.
Yeah. Thank you, by the way, for doing this. And as a Black queer person, it's important, and non-binary Black queer person, it's important to see other Black queer non-binary people doing their thing.
Yeah.
So you're just like living inspiration. So thank you. And how, if you can answer the question, how can you or did you move from bitterness into like compassion and where you are now? That's something that I've been really struggling with, even though I am a loving person, of just like people like my parents, for example, not being open to deeper reflection or a conversation, but still wanting to be in my life. So I'm just curious about that. If you have an answer to that.
No, yeah, that's real. And that's something that I think like I'm still trying to figure out. I think I spent the whole book um, and analyzing that specific question because it's so critical, especially for Black queer people, if we're talking about healing through the traumas that we've experienced. But I think the main thing that comes to mind is that you don't have to, like, bitterness and compassion or anger and kindness don't have to be in conflict. Like, I don't see those two things as being on a binary. Like, I'm still angry with my mother and she's not even here anymore. And but I still also love her deeply, and I love her beyond like what that anger could hold. And that's real too. And so I think being able to acknowledge and honor where that bitterness comes from, where that anger comes from, and not try to dismiss it, and not assume that you can't operate towards healing until that's gone. Because if you wait for that to go away, if it's legitimate and it's real, then you'll be waiting forever. So my main note would just be to do that, start doing that work anyway. And the way that you do that is to see, I think, um, that there's still so much that they are wrestling with too, or at least this is for me and my mother, like being able to contextualize all of the hurt that she went through and how that affected the ways that she passed that hurt down to me, and seeing hurt as this like generational thing that also I could recognize in her relationship to her mother, made it a lot easier for me to approach her from that place of compassion, even though I still had some of that anger as well. And so that takes a lot of work, I think, just internally. Like, we have to be able to take a step back in ways that we're not necessarily used to, in ways that don't always feel fair in the moment, to see the larger systems that are at play, in order to start engaging in that way. And so what has helped me with doing that was altar work, doing that first with my grandmother who passed away, because I still had a lot of anger towards her, and realizing that I could still do that work with her and our relationship even after she was passed, really opened up the opportunity for me to engage with relationships that I thought were not accessible to me here now, in a really powerful and spiritual way. But also, like, therapy was really critical for doing some of that work too. But the main note is that you don't have to release that anger. Your anger is a part of you. Your anger is a healthy emotion, like any other emotion that comes from you. And figuring out how to move with that anger is a good next step.
All right. All right. Good evening. My name is Reginald Brown. My pronouns are they and them. You know, I resonate with so much of what you said on so many levels, talking about tying in capitalism and how racial capitalism is the DNA of this country, and the way that it shows up in the strict gender laws or gender assignments that we're supposed to feel into. You know what? Every day I wake up queer, gender nonconforming, and Black is a day of revolution. So I say to you, do you have any, you talked about your adult parents, did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have.
And if you did, can you tell me how that, and the dynamic with that, please?
Yeah, I have 18 siblings. Yeah, my mother had 10 children. My dad had 12, and they had 3 together. Um, so there are many different dynamics. I'm closer to like my mother's kids. So I was raised with my mother. They're married, but we were their last their last batch. They stayed together after. And so my dad's kids from previous marriages, I didn't grow up as close with. Um, and my mother's kids, like, we've done a lot of this work together. And in the same ways that I was sharing this with her while I was writing, I was also sharing with them. One of the things that we had to work through is that even though that they were very supportive throughout this whole process and throughout even the tension that I had with my mother, they were beautifully and wonderfully supportive. Like, when my mother stopped signing off on loans, my sister was like, I'll do it. But one of the things that we had to, there are two main things about our relationships that this book highlighted. It was really important. It was one, to show that the experience of being queer is different. And so there was a lot of like, yeah, our mother hurt you, but like she hurt all of us, like, and that was like a lot of like conflation of experiences. But there was also a lot of recognizing, for me, there was a lot of similarities, in particular how like the men in our family were not allowed to be their full selves growing up. And so we've those are like, especially with conversations with my little brother, and I include a letter in here where he like wrote to me because he was like, I feel like after you went to college, you kind of abandoned me and I needed you here. And he's straight and cis. And he's like, I understand why you did it, but I feel like I was going through a lot of the same things because like I didn't feel like I could be my full self in this house. And I was like, what does it mean? Like, what is a full self? Mean that's like so I couldn't even imagine that with a straight and cis man. And so it's been really interesting to do that work around gender and about Black gender, because we're all told to cut certain parts of ourselves away, and it's not just us who are doing, even though it's a specific way that we are challenged with that. And working through that with my siblings has been really eye-opening.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
So Hari, we have a question from Fran B. Asking, how did you come up with the title of your book?
Yeah, so I was thinking about the ways that linear time and thinking about time and like a straight trajectory denies us the opportunity to do the work of like inner child work, like or ancestor work. Once something is gone, like what do you have access to? How do you reclaim that? And so Black Boy Out of Time was like a challenge to thinking of time linearly, because I think that the kind of healing work that is necessary for Black children and Black queer children in particular, or people who used to be Black queer children, requires us to rethink what we still have access to. We do still have access to that child part of us that might have been denied us or that we might have been removed from. And then the other aspect of the title that became clear as I wrote, and when my mother was diagnosed with this rare and aggressive form of cancer, was just the urgency of doing this work. And so Out of Time, like we might not be out of time yet, but we have to do this work every day. We have to start now in order to live the lives that we deserve and need to live. And so those were the two different aspects that I was thinking about with the title.
I didn't even think of being out of time, like a lack of time, but yeah, that's really great how that works on those levels. I think this is more of a comment than a question, but from Hugh English. Hari, first, your answer about anger and compassion was so beautiful. I had to stop my video for a few minutes to weep privately. I mean the weeping that comes from one's heart and mind being touched rather than from sadness by itself.
Oh, thank you, Hugh.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Those are good weeps. I've had more of those recently. Those weeping of just being touched, and I'm like, wow, I could have been doing this my whole life instead of just saving my tears for being sad.
Yeah, that's probably true for a lot of us.
You seem quite young. You've got a lot of time.
Are there any other questions or comments that people want to share?
Hi, my name's Leo. I wanted to thank you for this offering. I literally just got the book in the mail, and my therapist, who is a white gay man, you know, told me about this. So I feel like I hope that this is not answered in the book and it's redundant, but like I literally just got it. But I wanted to I'm like literally writing things down like inner child work. Like I'm gonna ask him about that, and like. And so, but when I heard you talking, I was just wondering a little bit more, like what kind of treatment you've had, because basically I've heard like a little bit of the language of like dialectical behavioral therapy and like holding two things at the same time. And that's something that I've done a lot of work in. And so just, if you could speak to, other kinds of, therapy that you've done, because, for a lot of the times I'm the only Black man in the group. So, I realize now that that's a strength, but, I just sort of wanted, if you could talk a little bit more about the treatment that you've had. Thank you.
Yeah. So I haven't had like too much experience with like I've just done cognitive behavioral therapy, and my therapist will pull from like the dialectical model for certain things. But yeah, I can't speak too much beyond that because this is the only experience that I've had. I've had experience with other therapists, but they've all also been CBT therapists, and it's been a similar experience. But yeah, being able to think of, I love how this model fits with thinking of things outside of the binary. And just as a non-binary person, I think it made perfect sense when I started to do some of this work. And in particular, when I'm thinking about the healing work within relationships, and like my answer to earlier about holding compassion and anger at the same time, and how do you do that, is also, to me, it's a very queer thing to do. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I'm not an expert on any of this, so I don't want to speak too much about it. But I would love to have another conversation with you after you read it, since that's something that is part of your background, and then we can talk more specifics about what these different models look like in relation to the book.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely looking forward to reading it. Hit me up next week.
That's great. Have you had it? I mean, you've done a lot of events, Hari, but have you had a lot of conversations with readers aside from, interviews? I mean, like interpersonal conversations about it.
Yeah, I'm starting to get more of just like random messages from people, like this high schooler is like, I did a presentation on your work. I'm like, oh, that's like my
sweet.
book, like places that I didn't even know where it was. And so, yeah, I'm starting to get more of that. Most of like friends and family had read it earlier, and so I had conversations with them prior about it. And yeah, it's been interesting to get the feedback. One of the things that I've noticed from some white people, and this has been interviewers, is that they'll focus on like all of the trauma and like, how are you so brave to do this? Which I think is like completely misses the point of the book. And so it's always great when we can have conversations like this that focus on what resonated with folks about healing, and then the other aspects of the book as well. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Let's see. Oh, we have another question from Brianna Childs. I have a question. As a young Black queer woman, I often internally feel the need to prove my existence and oppression to white society, even though I know this is not necessary. Have you moved past this in your journey? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we ever really move past it. Like that's a pressure that comes from everywhere. Like you wake up and you're getting that message from anybody that you interact with, any media that you consume, everything, because that's just the world that we live in. And so I wouldn't say that I've moved past it. I definitely have tried to commit myself to recognizing when that does come up and challenging that tendency, because I do think exhausting and harmful for us. And so it just is, yeah, it's a process. I think it takes intention. I love ritual because ritual, it has been like the single most effective way to do this challenging work, because if you're being inundated with all these messages all of your life, you're going to have to put something into practice. And so even if that's like something you meditate about every week or every day, or something you bring to your altar, or just when you're engaging with people, having that at top of mind so you can practice that within your conversations that feel safe with your family, with your friends, is helpful for building up that muscle when you're faced with that outside of the context. So I hope that answered your question. I wouldn't feel guilty about feeling that pressure, because I think we all feel it, and I don't think that that's something that we ever grow out of. But we do get better at challenging that by just practicing that through various rituals.
Yeah, you talk about some of that in the book, about having an altar, about speaking with your grandmother, and you say that it's not a particular practice, that you weren't mentored or something in this practice, that it's kind of something you developed on your own. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, by the time I finished the book, I'd done more like exploration of like hoodoo and African traditional religions. Like now my altar is set up properly with like everything that's supposed to be on it. But hoodoo in and of itself is like, it's something that we've made up as Black people through the last 500 years based on what we were allowed to carry through. And so there's going to be elements of it that you are bringing to it and that feel like just a part of your practice anyway. And I think that's kind of the beauty of hoodoo for me, is that I can take what I know about like altars from growing up Hindu and incorporate that into my altar work. That's why there's such a big element of like Christianity in a lot of the work, if you do any exploration of what it looks like. And so I've been doing more reaching out to people to actually guide me on the next steps. But I think to start, you can just start with whatever you're guided to do, which is really wonderful because it's not prohibitive.
Yeah, especially since so many queer people have had traumatic relationships with religions. It's often a difficult area to negotiate.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's see, we have another comment from Hugh saying, and perhaps a query, listening to you read, I was struck by the way that your prose, your sentence, how they accumulate and shift from story to reflection, to more reflection, and how they complicate. This last aspect of your writing seems to model thinking with the lived material experiences of identity, the real effects of identity, while also complicating simplicities of identities. I jotted down a couple of examples, and forgive me if I'm quoting you inaccurately. Neither of us believe there is such a thing as same-sex, and Black Virginian women never let their size be a reason to disappear. So I'm wondering if you are thinking explicitly in your writing about thinking with identity while complicating its articulations.
Yeah, I think that is, that's just something that I've always been interested in doing. I think that the ways that I've learned how to like complicate shit around identity and think about theory is by rooting it into like personal experience. And so when I'm writing, I'm always trying to, if I want to say like if I'm making a big argument about identity, or like how we come to form those things, those ideas around them, I'm always thinking about how do I root this in a story, and what story like exemplifies this. And so that's generally how I make those movements from the lived experience to thinking about identity in a larger theoretical framework. I think that was the answer. That was a response to your question.
That sounds good. Yeah, I think that's something you do really, really well in the book is tying those larger picture issues into the personal. And that's one of the reasons I would definitely recommend that folks read this book is because it's so pertinent to discussions that are being had finally in our larger society. And it's really, I mean, how else do you talk about it if you don't talk about the personal? It's intensely personal.
Right.
Could I just add a little to that?
Sure.
Is that okay? I don't want to talk too much here, but I just want to say I think it's more than just going to story for identity. I think a lot of times people go to story for identity and they come out with a kind of fixed notion of what an identity is. So
Mm,
it's really that you go to story and you use story not to simplify
mm,
what our experiences of identity are. It's real, but it's also socially imagined and
mm.
historical. And so your writing seems to both give us that realness of it, that experience of it, while also never fixing it.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean, fixing it in the sense of holding it in one place.
right.
So I think it's even more than just going to story. It's actually both going into identity and also sort of opening it out as well. And I
Yeah,
want to honor it, actually. I think it's very good.
I love that framing. And yeah, that's definitely what I'm trying to do. So I'm glad that resonated.
Cool.
Excellent. Well, we're at 7 o'clock, but I want to see if there's any last questions or comments that people want to ask Hari.
I just have a comment. I'm proud of you. Keep on keeping on.
Thank
You are my legacy.
Thank you.
And Reginald, I'm glad we're going to be seeing you in a week for that discussion of houselessness. So I hope folks join us for that. And please check out our upcoming events. We'll be posting a few more. And I'll post the recording of this event on our YouTube channel as well. So if you know folks who would like to see this or who would benefit from it, please share that link once I've posted that tomorrow. And with that, I'm going to say thank you so much, Hari. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed reading your book and it was very moving. And I think it's really important work.
Thank you. This was such a great conversation. I was really happy to be here. If anyone wants to connect with me on socials or anything, it's just my name, Hari Ziyad. And Leo, I saw your note. I'll shoot you an email. But yeah, if anyone else wants to engage, let's keep the conversation going.
Excellent. And I hope someday we'll get to host you in the flesh in the bookstore when we reopen. It will happen someday. Hopefully this year. All right. Thanks so much, Hari. And thanks everyone who joined us tonight. Have a lovely night.
Have a good one.